All right, looks like it's 11 o'clock. Thanks everybody again for joining. We're going to go ahead and get started. If you have any issues throughout this webinar, you can type into the chat box and we'll respond to you individually. Thanks everybody again for joining. Please go ahead and mute yourself if you're not already muted. I've allowed everybody to have microphone control today since this is a pretty tight group, and we're going to try to keep this right at 30 minutes and know that there will be a recording of this webinar that we're going to share after we're done here today. I'm Carson Priest from Smart Commute Metro North. Many of you know me. I work for Smart Commute. It's a nonprofit transportation management organization that works with communities and businesses to promote transportation options and improvements, foster economic vitality, and enhance mobility in the Metro North region. Today, we wanted to focus on some time on an overlooked often commute option that's currently getting a lot of attention in our current world. That's teleworking or remote working or work from home policies, whatever you want to call it. Many people are already navigating the waters around what teleworking is and how it changes some of their work processes. And we're here to offer further tips and address questions from our viewing audience today. We understand that in a normal situation, organizations would want to implement a teleworking program methodically, in steps, but in general today, we will explain the basic approach to teleworking in light of our current situation. Know that we're always available as a free resource for business consultations, and we'd be happy to talk to each of you individually after this webinar. I just want to point out a great reference from our sister organization, Boulder Transportation Connections. They put out a great long webinar last week. It's about an hour long with the Boulder Chamber. And I'll share a YouTube video during the middle of this session via the group chat, so you guys can check out that later. It's much more in depth than we'll get into today. As this presentation moves forward, as I said, please feel free to ask any questions by typing those directly into the comment field, the chat box, and we'll take some time at the end of the presentation to address those questions. Before we delve into our teleworking presentation, however, we wanted to be able to address the just released information about RTD service cuts and how they're responding to the COVID-19 crisis. The cuts are detailed on the RTD website, and Smart Commute can also provide an in-depth look at how they're affecting your community as well. These cuts have provoked quite a few questions in the public, and we've asked that District J Director Vince Busick join us today to address some of those questions. Thank you, Director Busick. If you can unmute yourself, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Carson. I appreciate being here. And just to refresh everyone's memory, District J consists of the communities of Westminster, North Glen, Federal Heights, Western Thornton, and portions of unincorporated Adams County. So I'll get right to the COVID-19 issues that RTD has been facing. On March 24th, the board voted unanimously to implement dramatic service changes. These changes have been implemented to address operator safety and ridership reduction caused by the pandemic. We continue to monitor operator safety throughout this and are exploring additional measures, including rear door boarding and fare waiver options. In fact, we may be sending out a press release later today on some of those issues. Overall, our ridership is down over 70% as a result of COVID-19. And our sales tax revenues and fare box revenues are down significantly as well. The COVID service plan will reduce our scheduled service by about 40%. And a listing of these reductions can be found on the RTD website, www.rtd-denver.com. Some people have asked why we're waiting until April 19th to implement these changes. And while we hoped to implement them sooner, our collective bargaining agreement with our operator union requires certain notices to union employees and an opportunity for them to bid based on seniority for routes and schedules to work. The union, Amalgamated Transit Union Local 1001, has worked with RTD, and this April 19th date is the earliest date that they could accommodate for the changes. Some of the routes are actually going to be temporarily eliminated. For example, up here, the 122X that takes you from Wagon Road to Civic Center will be eliminated during this COVID-19 fare plan. Others are going to a Saturday schedule during weekday service. They'll then have Saturday schedule on Saturday and Sunday schedules on Sunday. RTD plans on bringing service levels back as soon as practical and as soon as safe. We continue to receive input from the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, Center for Disease Control, as well as transit agencies and advocacy groups across the country. You know, the May 19 service reductions, which had been the topic of conversation since last summer, will go into place when we begin to restore service. And just as a reminder for people that reside in and about the District J area, District J was not impacted at all by those planned service reductions. However, we're all impacted now by the COVID-19 reductions. So let's take a look at some of the positive news and things that are coming out of RTD. So far, no operators have tested positive for COVID-19, and we're very excited about that, and we continue to monitor their health and safety. RTD has also been notified yesterday that we're going to be receiving funding from the Federal CARES Act in the amount of just in excess of $232 million. That money will go a long way to help us in this downturn of our sales tax revenue and fare box revenues that we're experiencing. Also, our Access-a-Ride customers can now use their service free of charge to pick up grocery. Information on how to schedule an Access-a-Ride grocery pickup are on the website. And remember, you must be a registered Access-a-Ride customer to take advantage of this. You know, the data that we've been hearing about shows a measurable reduction in air pollutants as a result of reduced traffic congestion. I think this is a great affirmation that transit and other measures, such as car and van pooling, which reduce congestion, can have a positive impact on air quality. And let's just hope that as we return to normalcy, that transit use increases. Finally, I'll give you all an N line, a North Metro line update. So far, RTD has taken control of the fixed guideway, the rails where the trains run, and is testing aggressively. We've had good reports from the Federal Railroad Administration and also the Colorado Public Utilities Commission, with whom we work closely. The contractor continues to perform its work to complete construction of station infrastructure and is on schedule to turn the entire project on May 4th. If the contractor meets the schedule, RTD is hopeful that it can have the line up and running for passenger use by August. And that's of this year, people. If there are any delays that may push this back as a result of the COVID-19 epidemic, for example, let's say it gets pushed back to September or October, RTD is committed to opening the line as soon as it can, even if it doesn't coincide with any of the 3 yearly schedule adjustment periods, what we call the run boards, just like we did with the G line that opened not in connection or combination with a run board. We'll do the same with the N line if that has to happen. And finally, our interim general manager, Paul Ballard, continues to make the N line opening a priority even in these uncertain times. Thanks, Carson. That's all I have for now.
Thank you, Director, for joining us today. We encourage people to ask questions in the chat box, and we will get to those at the end of the presentation if we have time. You know where to find him if we don't on the RTD website. He's always available for email questions. I'm going to turn the presentation now over to our teleworking basics and my coworker, Catherine Sanders. Catherine, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Carson. Hi, everyone. My name is Catherine Sanders. I am a part-time program manager here at Smart Commute, and Fridays are my work day, so I'm happy to be able to be on this webinar with all of you to review telework basics. I am working from home with children here, so occasionally you might hear them in the background, so please forgive me in that case. During this presentation, we're going to review what teleworking is, what it's not, tips for managers, tips for teleworking, and some important guidance for today's unique situation where team building and socialization are really imperative. If you do have questions through this presentation, please type them into that chat box and we'll address them at the end. All right, moving on. So teleworking or remote work or working from home is an extension of the workplace beyond the traditional office into the home environment. Teleworking maintains productivity in the face of emergencies, like what we're going through right now, and also in the case of severe weather. Teleworking requires and frankly grows good communication between managers and employees. Teleworking does rely on technology, but it also relies on the commitment of managers themselves and the people that they're managing. So what teleworking is not, it's not for all jobs and all employees. If you're operating a business that has essential staff that needs to be in your workplace in person, staff that can't do their work remotely, and there are, designated as essential at this point, you need to understand that you're not being unfair to those employees by letting their at-home counterparts stay at home. Teleworking is not a fit for all jobs and all employees. Teleworking is not an entitlement, and it's also not a replacement for childcare or dependent care. But note, both of these bullets have asterisks, and you'll see how we want to address those specifically in a moment. Finally, teleworking is not sending people home and never seeing them again or never hearing from them again. And teleworking is not a day off. All right. So, as I mentioned just a moment ago, we are in a unique situation. Because of shelter in place requirements, we at Smart Commute encourage managers to have honest one on one conversations with employees about what they need to do to ensure workflow is maintained. And while balancing that employees' particular needs. So, have honest conversations with employees about their circumstances and your business's circumstances and find a way to move forward. Communicate, communicate. All right. So, when you are managing remote workers, you are going to need to adjust your management strategies a bit. First of all, managers need to be aware that they will manage based on results, not based on directly supervising an employee at a desk. You need to extend trust to your employees, especially right now. You can't haul people back into the office. You need to trust them. An imperative to that trust, you need to develop good communication and clearly define your expectations for communication from your remote workers. And in addition to this, you need to maintain a team environment despite having distributed work. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what that means in a few slides. So, we do have some recommendations for managers. We're all in the middle of this evolving situation right now. And setting that aside, whenever it's practicable, please find a time to check in with your remote workers individually. Set up a time to talk with them over the phone and make a plan for moving forward. Our next recommendation after that check-in is to make sure that all work assignments are clear and that deliverables and deadlines are very well defined, because this is going to be how you're managing folks. You're managing by those results. Finally, we recommend that as soon as this webinar is ended, go back and create a schedule for yourself for initiating your own check-ins with your employees. So you can tell or ask people when you want them to communicate with you, but you should also be proactive in communicating with them. Right. So now, speaking of communications, let's take a look at those in a little bit more depth. So communication is the most important part of remote work. It's most important. It's the most important thing of any work, frankly, but it's especially important here at this time. So first, you will need to define the means of communication. If it's going to be by email, phone, video chat, project management software, instant messenger, etc. Second, you need to determine a schedule for those core communications. This is really important right now because employees are going to be juggling multiple roles, working, caregiving, and more. Third, you need to outline your own expectations as a manager for regular updates from your team. And those are often suited for the morning, lunch, and end of the day timeframes. Finally, you need to set expectations for communications to your external contacts. Those are your customers, stakeholders, and partners. So hitting all these points with your team really doesn't need to be complicated. And I'm just going to do a little rundown mock-up of how this could sound. So let's pretend I'm a manager at Acme Company. Hi, everyone. For our team here at Acme Company, we will use our work emails and Microsoft Teams to communicate with each other, and occasionally calls by mobile phones. I'm interested as a manager in being flexible at this time, but I ask everyone try to focus on internal communications in the 10 to 2 timeframe. Let's try to make our meetings, phone calls, and email discussions occur in this time frame as much as possible. And on that same note, I'd appreciate it if everyone sent an email recapping their work at the end of the day to me and outlining what they expect to work on during the next workday. Now, after saying that, I want everyone to be considerate of our client communications and make sure to respond to clients according to our normal business hours of 9 to 5. Right. End scenario. So having this all laid out is very, very simple, but it's helpful to define and make communications work well. Setting up these guidelines is very simple, and we strongly encourage you to deploy some flexibility at this time. So at this point in the presentation, I'm going to hand things back to my coworker, Carson. Thanks, Carson.
Thanks, Catherine. That was great. Hi, everyone, again. Now that Catherine has laid the groundwork for how teleworking can really function in the workplace, I wanted to hop in and highlight some of the parts of teleworking that may not seem all that important, but really are crucial to keeping a team going, especially in a time like today. In terms of advice for team building and team socialization in a time of remote working, it's important to understand and vocalize your own understanding of the situation that we're all in. Even bring levity to your team as you're able to and as is appropriate to your own team's interpersonal relationships. Another good tip for staying in tune with your team is to actually set reminders on your own calendar to check in with your team members about their personal well being, especially during a pandemic. A few ideas our team came up with to bring some levity to the situation that we're all in is to share photos of pets or even kids being funny while working from home. Or you could show off your work from home space to highlight how every team member really is unique. And finally, you could even hold a quasi push up challenge or some kind of physical challenge with your team members if that's a part of your normal daily routine at work. At the end of the day, it's important for your team to remain close during this time, but whatever works best for your team's interpersonal relationships are important, and you should keep those things going. Right. Here's a few funny photos we took from our team here at Smart Commute. There's Karen's golden retriever underneath her desk working hard. There's Tammy's coworker Finley, obviously working hard. And here's my sewing desk turned work from home station in the basement here. So these are just a few ideas you could share with your team just to keep your interpersonal relationships healthy during a time like this. As we shift away from a manager's perspective that Catherine was talking about earlier to an individual employee perspective, our team here at Smart Commute wants to point out a few tips for making the most of working from home under any situation. First, we encourage you to establish a routine. Find that routine that works best for your family situation, but keep the routine just that, a routine. That's what makes it valuable day in and day out in the normalcy of our work lives. Second, we find it useful that you use your normal commute time, that first 10 to 30 minutes of the morning, to plan out your workday and communicate with your supervisor about that work plan. And then if you'd like, at the end of the day, during that last 10 to 30 minutes, communicate with your supervisor about what you accomplished during that day. Third, find the work schedule that works best for you and respect that work schedule. Don't force yourself to work early or late hours just because there isn't a commute standing between you and your computer screen now. Finally, and again, be proactive in communications with your manager and coworkers, both about work and your normal life right now. One final slide here that we thought was important to include during these trying times is acknowledging that this is not your normal, let's get a teleworking policy set up with the HR guidelines or something like that. Most of us were thrust into this reality of COVID-19 and shelter at home orders, and there are some special rules that come along with this territory. Teleworkers need to balance work and personal and caregiving duties during shelter in place orders. You need to be forthright about communicating your needs and articulating how you will complete your work to your manager. And if you are a manager, Understand that your employee isn't always on the job and has to take care of needs outside of work right now. If you feel like work isn't being completed as a manager, be forthright, asking about work progress each day as long as you see fit within your own team's communications guidelines that Catherine went over earlier. The final point we will leave you with is that teleworking isn't about sitting behind your computer screen from 9 to 5 with that perfect 1 hour lunch break from 11:30 to 12:30 in the middle. It's results oriented in its nature. It's all outcome based. So understand that your workflow is going to look a little different through the lens of teleworking. It's not all about hours, it's really about the outcome, and communicating those outcomes between you and your supervisor are essential. Now that we've wrapped it up here about teleworking, the basics of teleworking in a time like today, and heard a little bit from Director Busick about RTDs, how they're addressing the COVID-19 crisis, we would love to take any questions you have in the chat box, and we will leave that open for a few minutes here. Well, here's the first one that came in. I've told my staff that they can be much more flexible in their work hours than we normally are to allow for time to get groceries and things, but I'm worrying about them taking advantage of this time. Is there a way to keep employees honest? I have a friend who uses IM to watch whether employee computers are active at the time. Catherine, I'm going to hand it over to you maybe to answer that one.
Thanks, Carson. I think that we go back to the core point of our presentation on that question is if you have a concern about whether people are actually working and you're like not quite sure if you should be having faith, communicate with them. You can ask them directly if you have that kind of relationship, like where's this or that proposal. You can ask surreptitiously a little bit about the progress that they're making. But right now, it's a time for more communication rather than less. And you might find yourself in more kind of scheduled meetings than you ever were in the office because you need to be able to connect and maintain work progress without being able to pop over to each other's desks at the office.
That's great. Thanks, Catherine. Here's one more for you now. I think it's probably best you answer this one as well. This is a great question. My staff's working from home, but we don't really have a formal way to log in. They're just logging into the email or the internet on their phones, and we're just doing group chats by phone whenever we find the time. Is there a better way to access work files? It feels really disorganized and it's interfering with our workflow.
Hi. We've actually mentioned this in a couple communications so far, so it might sound redundant, but we've had good reports from a couple different companies of using Google Remote Desktop. Um, like any remote software that you would have at a large corporation, you need to initiate it on both computers. And so this might be a moment that you send one person into the office and you have them one by one coordinate setting up the remote desktop between computers. Now that relies on if you have some kind of a computer at home. So you need to have a desktop or a laptop or a tablet that has like a strong interface. If you don't have those things, you do end up relying on um, those browser interfaces to get work done, which is a little bit harder. But the remote desktop through Google is free. It's a free resource. There are paid resources out there. There's a plethora of systems that you can purchase and implement that probably come with a little bit more IT support than Google remote desktop. But that's something that I would check out first. And if you have questions, just contact Carson or our team here and we can do some more research and digging around because we're trying to coalesce a lot of information about teleworking.
That's right. Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, if you have any questions further after this, feel free to reach out. We'd be happy to talk through what software knowledge we do have about how teleworking is going to work in a time like this. I have one last question, and we'll wrap it up unless any more come in. The last question I see here is what's going to happen to the new 144th Flex ride with the service adjustments? We've seen, I'll take this one a little bit at the beginning, and Vince, you're welcome to jump in if you'd like, but we've seen really great ridership on 144th Flex Ride, and that's primarily due to the Amazon DIN 3 facility that primarily is a lot of the ridership on that. And we've seen about 80% retained ridership as Amazon really ramps up hiring right now during this COVID-19 crisis. It's naturally dispersed in its nature, the Flex Ride is in terms of timing, but we're going to see it being adjusted to meet the needs of those employers like Amazon and the hospital that are right along its route. And some of the other retailers along the route will not have stops as they are closed down, like the Denver Premium Outlets is closed down right now for the next couple of weeks, and we've made adjustments to fix those problems. So with that, I don't see any more questions, and I just want to say thank you to everybody for joining us today. And again, we've recorded this webinar along with the slides, and we'll be sending it out. If you want them individually, please contact me or contact the info@smartcommutemetronorth.org email address, and I will get back to you as soon as I possibly can with more information. Thanks everyone for joining. With that, we will round it out.